They sabotaged my career, erased me from family photos, and called me a failure in public. I found the proof, said nothing, and let a $47 million breaking news alert do it for me. If you had actually done something with your life, I wouldn't have to explain you to people. My mother said this on a Saturday in October at my cousin Renata's engagement party, in front of 43 people I had known since childhood. I counted them later, the way I count everything, methodically, without sentiment. 43 people, some of them holding champagne flutes, some mid-laugh when she said it. All of them going quiet in that particular way that a room does when something unseeable has been made visible. I was standing 3 feet from her. I was wearing a charcoal blazer I'd bought in Brussels the previous spring, which she had never seen and didn't recognize. My name badge from the conference I'd flown in from was still in my jacket pocket. I had driven 4 hours from the airport to be there because she called me the night before and said, "You should come, family should be there for family." I stood there and I let the sentence land. This is what I want to tell you about that moment. It didn't break me, that's the part no one tells you. The breaking doesn't happen in the moment of impact. It happened years ago, quietly in 100 smaller rooms before that one. What happened in that ballroom at Renata's engagement party was something different. It was more like a calibration, the kind of precise final measurement you take before you close a case file. I swallowed the silence. I had been swallowing it for 11 years. I had developed a kind of muscular competence for it, the way athletes develop muscle memory. But something shifted in my chest in that moment, the way a load-bearing wall shifts before a building decides at last to be honest about what it can and cannot hold. The world didn't shatter, it divided. Cleanly, structurally, the way a blueprint separates into before and after a renovation is approved. That was the last night I was the person my family had spent 11 years describing. And if you are watching this and if something in this story lives in your chest the way it lived in mine, I want you to stay with me. This is not a revenge story, this is an audit, and audits done correctly are not emotional, they are precise. If you genuinely connect with what you're hearing, take a moment to like and subscribe to this channel. It costs you nothing, and it means more than you know. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where in the world you are and what time it is where you're sitting with this story. Part 1: The Erasure. My name is Marcus. I am 31 years old. For most of the last decade, I have been, depending on who in my family you asked, one of the following things: a disappointment, a phase, a cautionary tale, a burden dressed up as a choice, or my personal favorite, the one my father deployed at Thanksgiving 4 years running, still figuring things out. My brother Dominic is 34. He's a litigation partner at a mid-size firm in Atlanta. He drives a BMW 7 Series in a color the manufacturer calls frozen dark silver, which is the most expensive way in the English language to say gray. He makes, by his own frequent advertisement, somewhere north of $380,000 a year. He has been engaged twice. He owns a condominium in Buckhead that he mentions in conversation the way other people mention breathing. Dominic is what our family calls someone who made something of himself. I am or was a restoration architect. Technically, that's what it said on my business cards, the ones I had printed in matte black with silver foil type that I never showed my family because I had stopped introducing myself to them years earlier. Restoration architecture is, in plain language, the work of looking at a damaged or decaying structure and determining with precision and patience what can be saved and what must go. It requires a specific tolerance for looking at something broken and not flinching. I was good at it. I was, in the years before everything changed, becoming recognized for it quietly, the way certain professionals are recognized before the world decides to make noise about them. But in my family's taxonomy, restoration architect parsed to approximately nothing. It wasn't law, it wasn't finance. It didn't have a named partnership track or a corner office with glass walls facing a city skyline. When I graduated with my master's degree in historic preservation at 23, my father shook my hand at the ceremony the way you shake hands with someone else's kid, firm, brief, devoid of recognition. "When are you going to get a real job?" He asked, and he wasn't being cruel. That's the thing I want you to understand. He genuinely did not know what he was looking at. My mother's approach was different. She didn't ask questions, she curated. At family gatherings, she would describe Dominic's career with the specific vocabulary of someone who had memorized the relevant terminology: litigation strategy, deposition, billable hours. And when someone asked about me, she would shift topics with the smooth efficiency of a channel change. She became skilled at making me disappear from sentences I was technically present in. There were photographs on the wall of their house in Savannah, a formal family portrait from 2017, Dominic in the center in a suit, one hand on my father's shoulder. My mother beaming beside him. I am in that photograph, technically, structurally, in terms of physical presence, but I am at the edge, half-turned, lit by whatever happened to fall on me from the frame's periphery. I've looked at it since. My mother's body faces Dominic at a slight angle. Her weight is on the foot closest to him. I am not the subject of any line of sight in that image. This is not an accident. I understand that now, not malicious design necessarily, but not accident either. Something in between, the kind of neglect that begins as habit and calcifies into architecture. There was a smaller table. I need you to understand the smaller table, because it's the most accurate symbol I have for what the preceding 10 years felt like in my body. At Thanksgiving, at Christmas, at Easter, at the various celebratory dinners that orbit a family like satellites, there was the main table, the long one in the dining room with the good china and the cloth napkins and the candles and the silver holders my grandmother brought from her first apartment. And then there was the folding table in the sunroom with the paper napkins and the mismatched chairs, the one that caught drafts from the poorly insulated sliding door. I sat at the smaller table from the year I started grad school until the year I stopped coming home. It wasn't a formal assignment. It was more like a gravitational consensus. Dominic would arrive and my father would say, "Come sit with us," and my mother would arrange the main table around him, and I would find myself in the sunroom with the younger cousins, eating off a plate that didn't quite match, listening through the wall to a conversation I was not part of. I ate at that table for 6 years. I kept a record of it, not out of bitterness, out of professional habit. I document what I observe, it's what I do. Part 2: The Hidden Sacrifice. In the spring of my 24th year, my grandmother had a stroke. Her name was Iris, she was 79. She lived alone in a house in Macon that she'd owned since 1968, a craftsman bungalow with original heart pine floors and a screen porch that faced east so she could watch the morning come. She had lived in that house for 56 years. She knew every sound it made. She called me once, a week after moving there with my grandfather in 1968, and told me she could feel the house breathing. I was not yet born when she said it. She told me the story when I was 7. I never forgot it. The stroke happened at 1:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in March. I know the time because I was awake. I was working on a proposal for a municipal restoration project, the kind of low-margin government contract that kept my practice technically viable while I built the other thing, the thing no one in my family knew about. My phone rang. It was a neighbor who had seen lights go strange in the house and called an ambulance. She didn't have Dominic's number. She didn't have my parents' number. She had mine because I had given it to her the previous summer when I drove down to replace 3 boards on the front porch steps that had rotted through. I gave her my number and told her to call me if anything felt wrong. She called me at 1:47 in the morning and I was in my car by 2:04. I called Dominic from the highway. He picked up on the fourth ring, voice thick with sleep. "Gran's had a stroke," I said. "I'm driving to Macon. She's at the medical center." There was a pause. "How bad?" he asked. "Bad enough that someone needs to be there." Another pause. I heard him shift. I heard the particular acoustics of a high thread count mattress in a large bedroom. "I have a deposition at 8, he said. "I can't look. Call me when you know more. Keep me updated." He hung up. I called my parents. My father, to his credit, said they would drive up in the morning. My mother said, "Is she going to be okay?" And when I said I didn't know yet, she said, "Let us know," and went back to sleep. I arrived at the hospital at 3:31 in the morning. I sat in a plastic chair outside the ICU for 4 hours. I spoke to the attending physician. I signed documents. I made phone calls. I held my grandmother's hand when they let me in, and she looked at me with the half of her face that still moved, and I watched her try to say something she couldn't form. I told her I was there. I told her I wasn't leaving. I did not leave for 11 days. I worked remotely. I rescheduled what I could and lost what I couldn't. I slept on a cot in the family lounge. I met with the occupational therapist, the physical therapist, the speech pathologist. I learned what a dysphagia diet was. I learned the difference between a hemorrhagic and ischemic stroke and why the distinction mattered for her particular recovery trajectory. I became, in 11 days, fluent in a language no one in my family had bothered to learn. Dominic came on day 7. He stayed for 4 hours. He brought flowers that he set on the windowsill and that my grandmother could not see from the bed. He spoke to the attending physician for approximately 8 minutes, asked questions that indicated he had not read any of the materials I had sent him, and then said he had to get back. He hugged me at the door. He said, "You're doing great, you've got this." He meant it kindly. I believe that he genuinely did not understand that "you've got this" is not a substitution for presence. My grandmother came home in 6 weeks, not to her house, to mine. I had converted the office in my apartment into a recovery room. I hired a part-time aide for the hours I couldn't be there. I drove her to appointments. I cooked the specific foods her speech therapist recommended. I did this for 14 months. During those 14 months, I was also building the other thing. I want to be precise about this because I think people will assume the secret work was a reaction to the family's behavior, a kind of wounded ambition. It wasn't. The other thing had been in development since I was 26. It preceded the stroke. It preceded most of what I'm about to tell you. The family's treatment was not my fuel. My fuel was what it had always been, the specific structural belief that if you build something well enough, it will hold. I was building a platform for architectural documentation and restoration planning, a software layer that would allow preservation professionals to create, share, and monetize detailed structural models of historic buildings. In the years before AI-assisted design became mainstream conversation, I had seen in the granular daily work of restoration that the field's biggest inefficiency was documentation. Every firm was reinventing the wheel. Every municipal project was starting from scratch. The institutional knowledge of how to save old buildings was dying with the people who carried it. I built a tool that could hold that knowledge. I called it Archive. I built it in the margins, early mornings, late nights, the hours my grandmother was sleeping or in therapy. I brought on two co-founders remotely, both people I had met at preservation conferences, both operating under the same quiet conviction that the field needed infrastructure. We took no external meetings, we filed no press releases, we incorporated quietly in Delaware the way you do when you want to exist without announcement. My family knew none of this. They knew I was doing some freelance stuff. They knew I was taking care of Gran. Both of those things were true, neither of them was the whole truth, and the family's consistent failure to ask a single substantive question about how I was doing financially or professionally or personally made the concealment effortless. You cannot accidentally reveal yourself to people who are not looking at you. Part 3, The Sabotage. The discovery happened on a Wednesday afternoon in February, 14 months after my grandmother came home to my apartment. She had recovered enough to return to Mackin. Her speech was approximately 70% of what it had been, and she had developed a slight left side weakness that required a walker on bad days. But she was back in her house, back on her screen porch, watching the mornings come, and that was a success by every measure I knew how to apply. I had helped her home, organized a full-time aide, installed grab bars in the bathroom, reinforced the porch railing, fixed the step that I had never quite finished properly the summer before. I was going through her email on her behalf. She had asked me to help manage her correspondence, as typing was still labored. When I found a thread I wasn't looking for, the email was from my mother. It was addressed to someone named Gerald Hartwell, who I recognized after a moment as the principal of a firm in Charlotte that had reached out to me 2 years earlier about a senior preservation consultant position. It was a role I had been genuinely interested in, not because I needed the money. By that point, the early archive revenue was modest but real, but because the project portfolio was extraordinary and I had thought briefly that working within an established firm might give me the kind of institutional visibility the independent work lacked. I had applied. I had interviewed twice by phone. Gerald Hartwell had seemed genuinely enthusiastic. And then, in a sequence I had attributed at the time to the ordinary mysteries of hiring decisions, the process had gone silent. The email from my mother to Gerald Hartwell was dated 8 weeks after my second interview. I will not reproduce it in full. I will tell you what it said structurally, because structure is what I understand. It said that she was a family friend reaching out on behalf of the firm. It said that I was going through a difficult personal period and had significant caregiving obligations that make reliable professional commitments challenging. It said that she did not want Gerald to feel blindsided if my current situation made it difficult for me to deliver what a senior position required. It was 3 paragraphs long. It was written in the measured, concerned tone of someone performing genuine care. It was signed with her full name. I sat with my grandmother's laptop for a long time. I did not move. I did not feel what you might expect me to feel. I felt instead the particular quality of clarity that comes when a structure you have been misreading finally reveals its actual load-bearing design. I had spent years assuming that my family's dismissiveness was passive, the default gravity of people who did not value what I was doing. This email was not passive. This email was architectural. Someone had made a decision to interfere with a specific outcome and had executed that decision deliberately. I kept reading. There was a second thread. This one was older, from a period about 3 years before the stroke, when I had been in early conversations with a municipal agency in Baltimore about leading a significant restoration project, a historic courthouse that would have been, at the time, the largest commission of my career. The thread was between my mother and a woman I didn't recognize, whose email signature identified her as an administrative assistant at the agency. The email said that I had withdrawn from consideration due to family circumstances. I had not withdrawn. I had been waiting to hear back. I went back through my own email archives. I found the sent folder I'd combed through at the time, trying to understand what had happened. Nothing. The trail had gone cold the way trails go cold when someone intercepts them upstream. I created a folder. I began moving documents into it methodically, without rush, the way you organize evidence when you intend to present it. I did not call my mother. I did not call my father. I did not call Dominic, who I suspected was probably not directly involved but who had benefited from every diminishment my career had absorbed. I closed the folder. I saved it in 3 locations. I made a note in my project management system: Archive, accelerate series, a timeline, no further delays. I had always intended to take Archive public quietly. I had intended to build a stable, self-sustaining business that would eventually speak for itself. What changed in that moment, in my grandmother's living room in Mackin with the afternoon light coming through the blinds, was not my intention. What changed was my timeline. Part 4, The Build. The next 16 months were the most deliberately structured period of my life. Archive closed a series, a round of $11.4 million in the summer. We had 32 institutional clients. municipal governments, university historic preservation programs, two national architectural firms, and a product that had been described in 3 industry publications as the infrastructure layer the preservation field has needed for 2 decades. We were not in the news, we had not sought the news. I had a communications strategy that was built essentially on a single principle: let the work announce itself. I hired a full team, we moved to a proper office in Raleigh. I promoted one of my co-founders to COO and took the CEO title formally, which until that point had been more of an organizational convenience than a public identity. I flew to Brussels, London, and Toronto for partnership meetings. I wore the charcoal blazer I would later be wearing when my mother dismissed me in front of 43 people. My family did not know. This is the part people find hardest to believe, so let me explain it precisely. My family did not know because they did not ask. I had at various points attempted to describe what I was working on. At a dinner 2 years earlier, I had said to my father, I'm developing a SAW platform for architectural documentation. It's getting some real traction. He had nodded with the fixed, polite expression of someone waiting for a sentence to end. My mother had redirected the conversation to a case Dominic was working on within 45 seconds. The information was available, no one collected it. I want to be honest, made a choice in those months to stop offering it. Once I found the emails, I made a specific, deliberate decision to allow the family's existing perception of me to remain undisturbed. It was a data decision, not an emotional one. If they believed I was still figuring things out, then they would continue to behave in the ways that were native to that belief, and I wanted their behavior to be recorded accurately, not for retaliation, for clarity, for the audit. In the fall of that year, I received a call from a producer at a business media outlet I had been in indirect contact with for months through our PR firm. They were doing a feature on what they were calling quiet builders, founders who had scaled significant companies without the traditional venture-backed noise cycle archive fit the profile. The feature would include a profile piece, a television segment, and coverage that would run across their platforms simultaneously. I said yes. We scheduled the air date. I did not tell my family. Part 5, the gavel. My cousin Renata's engagement party was the Saturday before the segment aired. I want to be clear that I did not plan this. The timing was coincidental in origin, though it became. By the time I drove to that ballroom, something I understood I would not be deflecting. My mother had called me the night before, and I had driven 4 hours to be there, and I had worn the blazer, and I had walked into that room carrying 11 years of erasure and 14 months of documented interference and 16 months of deliberate structural silence. My mother's sentence landed at 7:22 in the evening. If you had actually done something with your life, I wouldn't have to explain you to people. She said it to my Aunt Clara, who was standing next to her holding a glass of Prosecco. They were talking about the family, the way families do at parties, accounting for each member the way you account for assets, what each one is worth, what role they occupy. I had apparently come up as a gap in the accounting. An asset with no assigned value. She did not look at me when she said it. That's the detail I keep returning to. She said it about me in a room where I was standing without looking at me. The sentence was addressed to Clara, to the heir to the family's established narrative. I was present as an object of description, not as a participant in a conversation. I swallowed it for the last time. I went to the bar. I ordered water. I spoke to Renata, who was radiant and nervous and deserved her moment, and I told her she looked beautiful. I spoke to my Uncle Terence, who had always treated me with the specific warmth of someone who never bought the family's accounting. I stood near the windows for a while and watched the city. I did not say anything to my mother. I did not seek out my father to register a complaint. I did not find Dominic, who was across the room holding court about something I could tell was billable by the way he was gesturing. I waited. The segment aired on a Sunday morning. I was already driving back when it ran. The producer had told me it would go live at 10:00 a.m. Eastern, across television and all digital platforms simultaneously. They had pulled my photo, a clean professional shot from a conference I'd spoken at the previous spring, and the chyron they had written read, Marcus, last name 31, CEO of Archive, the preservation tech company that quietly built a $47 million empire. At 10:04 a.m. on Sunday, I was on the interstate when my phone began receiving notifications at a frequency I had to turn face down on the passenger seat. At 10:07, Dominic called. I let it go to voicemail. At 10:09, my father called voicemail. At 10:11, my mother called voicemail. At 10:13, my Aunt Clara called, and then 3 cousins in rapid succession, and then a number I didn't recognize, and then Gerald Hartwell from Charlotte, who I had never actually met in person, whose call I also declined. I pulled off at a rest stop and sat with my coffee and let the phone ring. The feature was running. The segment had aired. The text notifications were a kind of structural cascade, the way a building settles when a long-deferred correction is finally applied. All of it happening at once, all of it inevitable. Once the foundation shifted, I read Dominic's voicemail first. Marcus, hey, I saw the thing, the news thing. I had no idea, man. I had no idea you were. Why didn't you? Can you call me back? I think mom and dad are. Just call me back. I read my father's. Marcus, call me when you get this. I want to hear from you directly, not just call me. I read my mother's. There was a long pause before she spoke, long enough that I thought for a moment the recording had cut then. I'm watching the television and I don't. Marcus, where are you? Please call me, please. I sat at the rest stop for 17 minutes. I drank my coffee. I watched a family at the next picnic table, a father, a mother, two kids, a dog that was very excited about a trash can. The ordinariness of it was beautiful in the specific way that ordinary things become beautiful when you have been looking at something extraordinary for a long time. Then I got back in the car and drove home. Part 6, the fallout. I want to tell you now about the mechanics of what came next, because the mechanics matter more than the emotion, and because the emotion, frankly, was quieter than you might expect. I did not feel triumph. I want to be specific about that. What I felt in the days after the segment aired was closer to the feeling I have at the end of a successful structural assessment, a kind of professional completion, the satisfaction of a question answered correctly, a building's condition finally accurately recorded. It was not warm, it was not cold, it was precise. The calls continued for 4 days before I responded to any of them. On the 5th day, I called my grandmother. She had seen the segment, her aide had found it online, and they had watched it together on her laptop in the living room with the heart pine floors. She cried a little, she told me. She said she had known for a long time that I was doing something real. She said she was sorry she hadn't been able to say so more clearly when she was sick. You were the only one who came, she said. At 2:00 in the morning, you were the only one who came. I know, I said. I know, Gran. On the 6th day, I called Dominic. He was quiet in a way I had not heard from him before, not the silence of disinterest. The silence of a person recalibrating. He asked me questions, real ones, about archive, about the product, about how I had built it alongside everything else. He listened, he did not interrupt. When I finished, he said, I owe you an apology. I told him I wasn't calling for an apology. What are you calling for? He asked. I'm calling to let you know I'm restructuring my financial arrangements with the family. The loans I co-signed with Dad, those are going to need to be refinanced. I'm removing myself as a guarantor by the end of the quarter. You'll need to be aware of that. There was a silence. How much? He asked. I told him the number. Another silence. Marcus, I'm not negotiating this, Dom. I'm informing you. I'm giving you 60 days notice, which is more than anyone gave me when my career was being sabotaged. I said that last part evenly, without emphasis. The way you cite a document in a meeting, factually, because it belongs in the record. He didn't answer immediately. Then, what do you mean sabotaged? I have the emails, I said. When you're ready to have that conversation, I'm ready to have it. But not today. Today, I'm just giving you the financial notice. On the 8th day, my mother called again. I answered. She spoke for approximately 6 minutes before I said anything. The shape of what she said was an apology, though the specific architecture of it was such that the fault kept migrating. Toward misunderstanding, toward my distance, toward the difficulty of knowing what I was doing when I wasn't sharing it. The apology kept collapsing into explanation, the way poorly built structures collapse into themselves when the load-bearing elements aren't where they're supposed to be. When she finished, I waited a moment to make sure she was done. Then I said, Mom, I found the email you sent to Gerald Hartwell. Silence, and the one about Baltimore. The silence changed quality. It became a different kind of silence. I am not calling to discuss those today, I said. I want you to know I have them. I want you to know they're documented. And I want you to know that I'm not going to pretend going forward that the last 11 years were a misunderstanding. They were not a misunderstanding. Some of them were choices. Marcus, I also want you to know that I'm withdrawing as a co-signatory on Dad's business line of credit by the end of Q1, and the loan I backed for the house renovation in 2021 will need to be refinanced. I've already spoken to the bank. You have 60 days. You can't just, I can, I said, and I love you, Mom, that's not a negotiation, but the financial structure of this family has been built on the assumption that I would keep carrying weight that no one acknowledged. I am not carrying it anymore, she said. I can't deal with this right now. I let that land, and then I said quietly, precisely with the professional steadiness of someone reading from a documented record, I know. That's what I used to say to myself at 2:00 in the morning driving to Macon. I ended the call. The loans were a larger issue than I think my family had fully modeled. My father's business line of credit, he ran a modest commercial real estate consultancy that had been underperforming for years, was secured against a combination of assets, including a property I had co-signed on in 2019 when he'd faced a liquidity gap. At the time, he had asked me quietly, not in front of Dominic, and I had agreed without hesitation because he was my father and because I was, despite everything, someone who showed up. When I removed myself as guarantor, the bank required a new credit assessment. The new assessment revealed that the line was under-collateralized. There was a margin call of sorts, not dramatic, not cinematic, but real in the way financial consequences are always real, immediate, structural, requiring decisions. My father had to sell the property. Dominic, who had positioned himself as the family's financial lodestone but had in practice been offloading the actual risk-bearing onto me for years while taking credit for none of the carrying, now needed to step in. He was not broke. The frozen dark silver BMW remained in the garage. But the arrangement he had lived inside, the one where he could perform prosperity without its obligations, while I performed obscurity and absorbed the actual structural load, was no longer available. He stepped in. He is the kind of person who, given no other option, does what is necessary. I want to give him that. It is not nothing, but the stepping in was not volunteered, it was engineered by the withdrawal of an alternative. The caregiving for my grandmother, the ongoing coordination, the scheduling of medical appointments, the management of the home aide, the quarterly review of her medication regimen had been mine entirely for years. I did not abandon it. I did not withdraw from it, but I restructured it. I hired a care coordinator. I established a formal family schedule distributed to Dominic and my parents by email that assigned specific responsibilities with specific dates. I sent it with read receipts. I kept the records. Dominic took the first appointment. He drove to Macon on a Tuesday morning and sat with our grandmother for 4 hours. He called me afterward and said, "She talks about you constantly." "I know," I said. "She showed me the porch railing you fixed. It needed fixing." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have been there more," he said. "Yes," I said, "I did not cushion it. You should have." The community dimension unfolded over the following weeks, with the slow structural inevitability of a building settling after a foundation repair. My parents belonged to a church in Savannah where social positioning is conducted with the care and precision of a diplomatic mission. My mother had spent years performing a version of our family that placed Dominic at the center and treated my existence as a minor footnote. The people at that church, the deacons, the women's circle, the various interconnected families who constitute the load-bearing walls of Savannah's particular black professional class, had received over many years my mother's curated account. The feature ran twice more. It was picked up by 3 regional outlets. Someone shared it in a Facebook group that I am told functions in that community as a kind of informal town square. Within 2 weeks, people who had smiled at me with the specific sympathy reserved for the family underachiever were calling my parents with a different energy entirely. I am told by my Aunt Clara, who maintained the warmth she had always had for me and whose account I trusted, that my mother stopped attending Wednesday evening services for a period of about 3 weeks. I am told that my father was asked at the golf club by a man named Warren, whose opinion he valued, how long he had known about Archive. I am told he said, "We always knew Marcus was building something." I have no comment on that. Gerald Hartwell sent me an email. It was professional, brief, and completely unremarkable in its attempt to seem as though the previous interaction had not occurred. I responded with equal professionalism. I told him I wished his firm well and that I was at capacity for the foreseeable future. I CC'd no one. I kept it in the folder. Part 7. What remains? I am writing this, thinking through it, structuring it in the office in Raleigh where I spend most of my working hours. The office has a view of a 1920s warehouse that someone is converting into apartments. I watch the scaffolding go up and come down. I think about what it takes to look at a structure and tell the truth about it, about what can be saved, what cannot, and what should never have been left to decay as long as it was. My grandmother called me last week. Her speech is mostly restored. She told me the morning light had come back to her porch the way she remembered it. She asked me when I was coming to visit. I told her soon. She said, "Bring that blazer. I want to see what success looks like on you." I am still in contact with my family. I want to be precise about this too because people will assume the ending is a clean severance, and it isn't. Life does not sever cleanly. Structures that have stood for decades, even damaged ones, do not simply disappear when you stop maintaining them. They do something more complicated. They become what they actually are rather than what they were performing being. My relationship with my mother is not warm. It is honest in a way it was not before. We speak on the phone approximately once a month. The conversations are shorter than they used to be and more structurally accurate. She does not dismiss me. She does not position me in relation to Dominic. She asks sometimes about Archive, about what I'm working on. The asking is effortful for her. I can hear the effort. I do not reward the effort with excess, but I do not punish it with withholding. My father is harder. He is a man who built his self-image on a specific idea of what success looked like, and discovering that the version he had dismissed was the version that arrived does not produce, in a man like him, a simple correction. It produces something more complex and I think more painful. I have more patience for him than I expected. I don't know exactly why. Dominic and I have dinner occasionally. When I'm in Atlanta, he is trying. The trying is imperfect and sometimes clumsy. He still gestures too much when he's talking about his cases, still has a tendency to position his professional wins as the center of gravity in any room, but he shows up to Macon now. He calls our grandmother on Sundays. That matters. It is not everything, but it is not nothing. I repaired the east wall of my grandmother's screen porch last spring, the one that had developed a slow rot in the corner post that I'd been meaning to address for 2 years. I drove to Macon on a Saturday. I brought the right wood. I spent the afternoon doing the work. My grandmother sat in her chair and watched me, and sometimes she talked and sometimes she was quiet. And the morning light was exactly what she had described when I was 7 years old. Before I left, she said, "You know what a good building is?" I said I thought I did. "It's honest," she said. "Every good building I ever knew was honest about what it was. The ones that fell down, those were the ones that were pretending." As I drove home thinking about that, the moral I want to tell you something that I think gets lost in stories like this. Because stories like this have a shape, a dramatic arc, a satisfying gavel drop, and the shape can become the lesson if you let it. The lesson is not the reveal. The lesson is not the phone lighting up in a ballroom or the margin call or the forward response that used my mother's words against her. Those are moments, structurally they are moments, load-bearing, yes, but not the foundation. The foundation is everything that happened in the years before them. The 2:00 a.m. drives, the 11 days on a hospital cot, the 14 months of modified meals and physical therapy schedules, the 16 months of building something real in the margins while a family decided, in my absence, what kind of person I was. Everything beautiful starts with structure. And some buildings are not worth saving, not because the material is bad, but because the design was never honest. You cannot restore something that was built on a false premise. You can document it, you can learn from it. But you cannot save it by continuing to hold it up. I am not my family's safety net. I never agreed to be. The role was assigned to me while I was looking the other way in the years when I was too young to see the architectural drawings clearly. By the time I could read them, the load had already been transferred. I set it down, that is the whole story. The dignity cost me the peace if the peace was ever real. And I have decided in the specific professional way that I decide things, methodically without sentiment, with full awareness of the documentation, that the peace was not real. It was a performed stability, the kind of stillness that a cracked wall presents before the crack decides to be honest. I chose dignity, I would choose it again. If you have ever stood at the intersection of keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, if you have ever faced the specific structural choice between the two, I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, which one did you choose? And did the choice hold? Drop your location and your local time. Somewhere in the world, someone is reading this at 2:00 in the morning, driving somewhere they need to be. If that's you, I see you. You are doing the thing that matters. Even if no one in the room knows it yet.